Shalom Aleichem, Guten Rosh Chodesh, Good Erev Shabbos, Chodesh Elul. We just heard the shofar. I'll talk a little bit about the Bobov Hasidim, the Bobov Rebbe, and Chabad and Lubavitch Hasidim. So this takes us back to the mid-1950s and 1960s in Crown Heights. The Bobov Rebbe lived in the west side of Manhattan, and in 1955, 54, 55, he moved to Crown Heights. At that time, when he moved, his cheder, his yeshiva that Bobov Hasidim had in Brownsville moved to be next to the Bobov Rebbe. So it was 176 Brooklyn Avenue, corner Prospect Place was the yeshiva. The house next door was the Reb Shlomo Halberstam, the Bobov Rebbe's house, 184 Brooklyn. Across the street was the Brooklyn Children's Museum. And the Bobov Rebbe's house, in the back, there was their beis medrash, and there was a mikveh on the premises too. Lubavitch Abachanim who learned at Bedford Dean, that's where the yeshiva was from 1946 before it moved to Ocean Parkway in 1969. They would use many times the mikveh there because they shouldn't have to walk more to Crown Heights, to Eastern Parkway, to the Kerastira mikveh and other Rogers, where Rabbi Harlick Shul had a mikveh. So they cut 10 minutes from their walk by walking there to the Bobov mikveh. And then came what we call the white flight, the 1960s, or the 1950s, going to the 60s. Bedford-Stuyvesant became all African-American, or mostly African-American, and became very dangerous. And it spilled over into that side of Eastern Parkway, the side that goes towards Atlantic Avenue, and that's where Bobov was, the yeshiva and the Rebbe's house, and the Hasidim living around there, and it became very dangerous. Someone told me that he remembers when the children were playing in the yard, and there was a building next door, and all of a sudden a milk crate box fell down, almost hitting one of the boys. So there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and it was a very, very tough time, and that went into the 60s. In the 60s, it started to spill over to go over to the other side of Eastern Parkway. So Eastern Parkway was kind of the breaking point. So where Lubavitch and others, Hasidim and even Litvisher, Chaim Berlin people, Tarvadas people, the Crown Heights Yeshiva, the Young Israel, Chayvei Torah, and going down to Empire Boulevard, Montgomery Street, all the streets that today are full of Lubavitchers, was a very, very large Jewish frum community. There were also not frum people, of course, in the neighborhood, the conservative synagogue, the Jewish Center, which today is Ole Torah, Ole Menachem, was the largest one of its kind in New York at the time, with with the hall and the swimming pool. But it started to spread. The African Americans started to spread, and there was realtors, some Jewish ones who were blockbusters. They took advantage of the situation, and they went to people and they said, "Your house will be worth nothing. Sell it now." And people were selling their house for $18,000, $20,000, $25,000. I mean, houses that were worth today $1 million to $1.5 million were being sold for $18,000 to $25,000 in 1964 and 65, 66, in those years. The Bobov Rebbe himself moved to Borough Park in 1967. They already purchased their property on 48th Street between 15th and 16th Avenue. They had their beis medrash, and I heard that there were kind of unofficial messages sent by the Rebbe to the Bobov to stay in Crown Heights. He wanted to stay, but his Hasidim told him, we already bought houses in Borough Park and we're going, and kind of, it's too dangerous for us. Anyway, he capitulated and he went as well. Then there was the famous Sikha, the famous talk that the Rebbe gave in 1969 on the last day of Pesach, Achar Shel Pesach, where the Rebbe spoke about, and he said the famous words that rings in our ears today, Kan Tzivos Hashem es habracha. Here God's blessing rests. And he was referring to the neighborhood of Crown Heights, and he said, this is the neighborhood which my father-in-law, the Holy Tzaddik, the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, lived, and he davened, and he learned for 10 years from 1940 to 1950. And the Rebbe took that to mean that the entire neighborhood of Crown Heights is a blessed neighborhood. And the Rebbe spoke about the importance of not leaving, and he quoted from the Shulchan Aruch, from Choshen Mishpat, you're not allowed to leave. And it was the first time that he addressed this issue in public. Although, as I said, the neighborhood was already going downhill from the early 60s, nevertheless, he didn't talk about it till 69. It could be, and this is only a thought, that there were some Lubavitchers who actually bought houses in other neighborhoods because they didn't hear from the Rebbe that you shouldn't do that, and everyone else was leaving, so they decided as well to leave. I assume someone told the Rebbe about this, and that's why he spoke in 69 about not leaving, and then all those Lubavitchers, of course, on the spot dropped their purchases, and just stayed put. So this was then it went into the 1970s, and the Rebbe said